You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
وتكلم من هناك لشوارزنيجر
Ya lo hace, pierna derecha, directo al arco, golazo, 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 golazo.
This is Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio, your new live show about the beautiful game in all its glory, with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. MLS, EPL, La Liga, Champions League, all is fair game. Powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us at sportspodcastingnetwork.com.
Good day, good night, and welcome to Soccer Today. Never a dull moment after we wrapped the show yesterday. Coaches got fired, controversies continued, but to talk about a controversy that's brewing now in Barcelona, our Barcelona correspondent, George Sarakinis, is joining us. George, how you doing today?
Good. How are you guys doing today?
Good. George, we wanted to have you because there's a bit of discontent amongst Barcelona fans as it relates to the president of the club, which is Bartomeu, I believe is how you say his name was. There's a hashtag that has started up that just basically asked him to resign. Can you just sort of tell us what is happening over there right now?
There's been some rumblings the last few years with fans, members not really happy with the direction of the club, being the first team, being the academy, the direction, players leaving. So the last few months, there's really been a lot of everything's picking up steam. And like you said, the hashtag of basically Bartomeu resign now. The other thing that's been happening is a former candidate in the past election, Benedito, has led a movement to pass a vote of no confidence against Bartomeu. So he needs, I think, roughly a third of the vote to put a motion in, and then if they're able to secure 2/3 of the vote, to have him actually leave as president of Barcelona.
So explain exactly for those of us that are in North America that don't necessarily follow clubs as closely as maybe you'd understand them over there, how exactly this works when you're talking about this kind of leadership structure at Barcelona. So just sort of set the scene of what precisely is happening here.
So they have a board of directors with Bartomeu at the top as president. Then they have the membership, which are, many of them are fans. You pay your membership each year, which allows you a vote for the club. So as I said previously, it's just, when you look at comparing the direction of Barcelona Football Club versus, in the last year or so, Real Madrid. As everybody knows, that's a heated rivalry. And when you have players, at the youth level in the academies leaving for other clubs, which Barcelona prides themselves on La Masia, having players go through La Masia to the first team. And, since Sergio Roberto, who's in and out of lineups, kind of a player that fills voids. Prior to that, it's the Messi and company group, so they just don't like the direction. And as you know, how many players have been bought recently through transfers the last 2 or 3 years? So,
George, it seems like the culture of Barcelona changed really rapidly over the last 5 to 6 years. For me, it all started from UNICEF to Qatar Foundation to as title sponsors, and eventually an actual company. Before, Barcelona as a club, as an identity, was not agreeing with having companies in front of their jerseys, and it was about community work. It was about awareness of other brands like UNICEF, and it's just an example. But I think deep in the boardrooms and in the feeling of the fans, slowly but surely, I don't know if it's capitalism or modern football has caught up to Barcelona.
Yeah, like you said, in previous, they've never had a shirt sponsor and basically had UNICEF almost sponsoring UNICEF by having them and promoting them on their jerseys. And in the last few years, you've had Qatar Airways. Last year you had another sponsor, and I believe this year they have a third sponsor. And many of the presidents who have wanted to become presidents have wanted to bring this extra money to the club through sponsorships, like many of the other clubs have done. So on one hand, they've gotten away from their sort of philanthropic sponsor on their jersey to trying to bring in more club, which they're now using to buy players, which again is going against their philosophy of developing their own players.
I know, George, you're very deep in the world of development, coaching young prospects as well. And when you're looking at the La Masia, like you mentioned, the Academy of Barcelona, and their output over the last 5 years, which is not even comparable to the prior 10, is it all mixed together? Is it a bit of a... I mean, Duane and I talk sometimes about how United lost their way over the last 5 years, and you see this in amount of England players performing for United and other things. Is it a danger that's looming for Barcelona if it continues the way it is going, according to many? Is there a chance that Barcelona won't be Barcelona very soon if it's not for transfers?
Well, I mean, as you said, the last few years, there really hasn't been any player that has graduated to the first team, and they've really looked to transfers. On the flip side, there's been rumblings that there's certain players that should have been, given that opportunity instead of going the transfer route. And that's where a lot of the frustrations from fans are coming from, is that we have talent that we should be able to get to the first team, and they're going elsewhere. We have, one player last year who went to Benfica. Another recent one this year has gone to AS Monaco. And now they're even, starting at 16 and 17 years old. You have one player that has left for Man City at 16 years old. And when you have an agent, as in Carlos Pujol, who bleeds Barcelona, saying that, Manchester City's setup is much better than La Masia, which he sort of came from, then that there's problems.
Well, for sure, George. I'm fortunate enough having gone to Barcelona in the past to have been to the new camp. I've gone to the museum there. I understand the culture that surrounds that club more than a club. Do you feel, being there, that there is a move away, that there is a danger that they will lose their way, or is this just a reaction to Real Madrid's success right now and sort of a scoreboard kind of related pushback that we're seeing?
I think the reaction in terms of the scoreboard is more the people outside of Barcelona, maybe outside of Spain, who now a lot of attention has been brought to it by the game on Sunday, and more people talking about it. But there has been, the last few years, people close to the club, coaches around here, who have been saying that they are sort of losing their ways, and they're not really developing these players. Their philosophies are changing from new people within the club, and there's fights between the new and the old and direction. And then you have the board and their way. And even on Sunday, you have a board member saying that PK was sort of changed the game, and now you have players responding back to the board in these interviews on TV. So it's not something that is really good for the club. And I think maybe this will be a turning point and sort of get them back on the right direction. But they could, as you said, be losing what Barcelona is about if they continue to go this way.
When you look at the hashtag and you listen to some of the rhetoric that's coming out amongst those that are pushing this agenda right now, and I say that without judgment, by the way, if anyone's listening, I think that I'm judging that. They're talking about stuff like not going to games, sort of putting their money where their mouth is, so to speak. How successful do you think that will be? Is it possible that they can have an impact that will be felt by the club's director or the club's leadership and may result in changes?
I mean, it's hard to say, what an actual member fan will do, as in terms of perhaps not showing up. But as most of these matches now of FC Barcelona, many of the fans are actually tourists. And it's sort of the mentality of, if we compare it to hockey with the Toronto Maple Leafs, and people attending, and, it's a night out, perhaps the hardcore fans who, think in this way may boycott some of these games, but I don't think in terms of the general feel about it that they would have that much success sort of at the games.
George, I'm wondering if the recent outcry of disappointment coming out after the transfer of Neymar has anything to do with this as well. I know the timetable is different, and this grassroots movement to change presidency has started long before. But with this big transfer out of Barcelona, this big Neymar drama, the debacle that happened over the last few weeks, what are the feeling of the fans? And did this transfer actually made that movement even bigger?
Well, I think it's fast forwarded it, tremendously with the Neymar transfer and not having a suitable replacement right away for him. On Sunday they had De La Feo playing, and of course he wasn't as successful as what Neymar has been. They're trying to get Coutinho from Liverpool. I've heard Verratti from PSG and a few others, and they've secured a right fullback, and they've secured Paulinho yesterday or today. And to many Barca fans and too many football fans, the signing of Paulinho actually makes no sense at all. So it's sort of adding to the fire. And then, of course, there's conspiracy theories as to why they've brought in Paulinho. So it's just adding more fuel to the fire, I think.
What is the reactions on the football perspective of the departure of Neymar? Because it's one of the rare cases where we see a player in his prime leaving a Barcelona, a Real Madrid, one of the only few clubs where you usually don't leave. So what was the impression of the fans in Barcelona with that departure?
Well, I mean, I think you have sort of half of the fans who, have named him a traitor, and, Barca brought a lot to him. And then you have the other half of fans who are a bit more realistic and say, he had to do it. The money was a good opportunity, but more importantly, as a player, some feel, and I guess Neymar feels that he can grow exponentially as a player at PSG, as opposed to Barca, where he's always going to play second fiddle to Lionel Messi.
George, couple quick questions to wrap here. I'm wondering, first off, and this is a bit of a philosophical question, you're speaking as someone who works in development and has a great understanding of the amount of talent that is in that area. Is it realistic in this era, in 2017, for a club of the size of Barcelona to be able to almost entirely rely upon graduating players through the ranks? Or are we in an era now where you need to buy big purchases, big buys, and bring in stars that are already established if you're going to compete at the very top of the game? Is it realistic to build from within now?
I think it still is realistic to build within. Of course, there's always going to be that one or two marquee signings that may push you over the top. But if you look in the case of Athletic Bilbao, yes, they're not Real or Barca, and they have their own philosophy of only Basque players and so on and so forth. And they're always, top 3, top 4, top 5 players. So I think they can still build within. If you look at Catalonia, they have the market of all the talent here. And if there is a talented player, likely they're going to go to Barca. But in the age of dollar sign or dollars, you have big players outside of Spain who are spending this money on 16, 17-year-olds. So it's going to be difficult, as I believe Barca doesn't have that policy to be paying these players, exorbitant amounts of money. So I think it's going to be difficult to keep players here for financial reasons alone.
And finally, just in a general way, I mean, as I said earlier, I've been to Barcelona, I've been to Madrid, I've been to some other major cities that have multiple teams. I've never experienced a city that was as uniformly around a single team in the way that Barcelona is. Can you just describe to those who have never been there what that club means to that city and that region?
Well, if you look at FC Barcelona, the slogan, more than just a club, it represents, basically the people of Catalonia on a political side of things, the constant battle of Catalonia with Madrid and, Catalonia wanting to separate from Spain. So there's, the football side of it, there's the political side of it, there's the cultural unique side of it, of a Catalan club in a Spanish league, as they like to refer to here. But 99.9% of fans or people in Catalonia are Barca fans. So it, represents them football-wise. It represents them politically and culturally. So as, the slogan says, more than just a club, they truly believe that it's more than just a club.
Fair enough. George, how can people follow you if they want to follow you on Twitter?
On Twitter, it's G Sarakinis. So as long as you can spell the name.
there's a way to filter out anyone that can't. All right, George, maybe we'll have you on another day to talk a little bit more about Canadian issues, which I know that you're passionate about as well. But we do thank you for your time as well on this interesting developing story in Barcelona. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
You are listening to Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
And we're back on Soccer Today. Fascinating stuff. Doing the always interesting to hear from what's going on in Barcelona. We think we experience a fan situation with the team in cities in Montreal and Toronto with hockey, or when we travel, or we experience other sports in other cities. But Barcelona and football, it's quite a special relationship.
Yeah, no, as I said to George in that last question, it's unique. If you've ever been to a city that has multiple clubs, there will always be that divide there. And Barcelona has a second club. They have Espanyol, but literally no one supports them. I mean, you might have fans that might just go to a game because it's cheaper and it's easier to get tickets, but they're just there to watch the football. They're not there to really support them. I shouldn't say that. There's probably like a very small minority within the city, but it is as that 1%, and they're the oddballs, right? Yeah. Meanwhile, you go to Madrid, and you can argue that Atleti's more popular than Real Madrid, and so on and so forth, and there'll be fights in every city that has too. But Barcelona is different, and it has to do with that history and that culture and that true belief that they are truly more than just a club. And I think that the root of this movement right now comes to a feeling amongst many of them that they're losing that identity and they're becoming just a club. And I think that that is ultimately what this comes from. Now, whether this can succeed or not, I'm not sure. I think that it can succeed in the sense that it can force out the president that's in charge right now, but whether whoever comes in to replace that and whatever leadership they move to beyond that, overall feeling that they're losing their identity, that's where I've struggled with it. I can see them removing the president. I don't know whether they can change the march of modern football.
All right, Duane, yesterday, about 15 minutes after we wrapped the show, we had the opposite of the Soccer Today bump happen. It's the first time in this show that a coach we interviewed a week before resigns in a post-dated fashion and is asked to leave right now. It's kind of the best way to describe the situation. Paul Dalglish, former head coach of the Ottawa Fury Football Club, has met with OSEG yesterday morning or the day before. It's kind of up in the air, but they had a meeting, talked about how Paul wants to leave the club anyways at the end of the season, and John Pugh and the direction of the club decided, you know what, maybe it's beneficial for both sides if this happens right now. Julian de Guzman, the interim head coach of the Ottawa Fury.
Yeah, a lot of moving parts with Dalglish. And I know some of our Fury listeners were upset that we weren't harsher on him in the interview, and I'll defend how we did that because you got to be somewhat diplomatic in how you ask questions sometimes, guys. But at any rate, putting that aside, there was an awkward, and I wrote that in Canadian Soccer News yesterday. There was an awkward relationship between their hardcore fans and him, and I think part of that had to do with just, it was always going to be difficult to follow the success of Marc Dos Santos. Especially when you consider the amount of money that was taken away from the club and the amount of players they had to sell almost immediately. So anyone that came in was going to struggle a little bit because they just weren't going to be as good. But he didn't help himself in terms of stylistically how he played and things like that. A couple of weeks ago, Austin was named as a new USL club for next year. He came from Austin. He has roots down there. He played in Houston as a professional. I think that a lot of people felt that that's where his heart was. And I think that that's ultimately probably what we'll end up seeing happening here. I have nothing concrete on that other than speculation, but it would not surprise anyone if Paul Dalglish was announced as the first head coach of the third kick of the can in Austin for USL for Division II soccer. So I think that's what it came down to. Obviously I think Ottawa too has a lot of balls in the air in terms of where they're even going to play in the next couple of years. I think it's increasingly becoming more likely that 2018 launch for Canadian Premier League seems like a stretch right now based on what I'm hearing. A lot of complications, including what we sort of alluded to with Hamilton yesterday. So I think we're probably looking at one more year in USL and then probably a move for the Fury into the Canadian Premier League when it launches in 2019. Maybe he didn't want to play in that area. Maybe they felt that they needed someone else that was better suited to work with younger players. And I think that De Guzman, that might be his greatest strength right now. He isn't that experienced as a manager, but he has worked with young players before in the Canadian national team setup. He has sort of been almost acted as a player coach at the end of his career there. I think it's an interesting hire, and it's a refreshing hire to give a Canadian a chance. You want to get the best person in a place in a professional environment, but I can continue get the full support of the club so that he can get a fair assessment at the end of the time, because he can only go so far, Kevin, and I'll let you jump in after this. He can only go so far in the sense that he still has Dalglish's players, right? There's only so many tweaks you can do when you have a team set up to play kind of derivatively. You'd call it hoopball, but that sort of direct style that he played.
Well, Julian De Guzman's leash will be a little longer. That's what happens when you play for that club. That's what happens when you're a legend in the sports in this country. Now he's going to become a coach, first-time head coach with Ottawa Fury, a club that he finished his career with, and he became some sort of a cult hero. Not necessarily having the best performances. He was at the club, though, for the highest level, right? When they went to the Soccer Bowl. Yes, he missed the Soccer Bowl to be part of the national team game, but he was still around the team, right? So nobody will remember that he missed the actual Soccer Bowl because he was playing for Canada. But that's the one thing, though, that De Guzman will have over Dalglish, if you want to compare it that way. Dalglish came in, like you mentioned, to replace, quote-unquote, the man. The only head coach that the Ottawa Fury has ever known at that point was Marc Dos Santos. And when you take over a coach that has been successful rapidly and made wonders and uses networks of contacts in Brazil and across the world to get you players that you weren't expecting to have and get you results, it's hard to take over from that point of view, that perspective. And Dalglish came in, guns blazing, trying to take over and fill that void. And that didn't really go over with the supporters. And it started on day one. And it never really got mended. So now with Julian De Guzman at that position, one thing's almost for sure is he will have what Paul Dalglish never had, which is a chance.
And look, you mentioned day one, and we interviewed him twice. We
interviewed him on day one. He was on the show on day one. Go back to listen to the interview, and you will understand what we mean.
Yeah, he said, we asked him how he could possibly follow up, and his initial response, rather than praising Dos Santos and praising the success of the Fury, and whether this was just sort of a unintentional sort of flip of the tongue that he didn't mean it the way he meant it, but it came off as arrogant in the sense that he said, oh, well, they didn't win, so they weren't successful. Well, and then he immediately followed up by finishing last place in the NASL the following season. So it's hard to really have too much sympathy for him at that point. And I think that the fans never warmed to him right from that initial get-go. You only have so much of a leash when you come in and you're replacing a legend. And Dos Santos was a legend in the club at that point. I mean, it's as absurd as that sounds, but he's only was there for 2 years, but nonetheless he was.
Yeah, but 2 years, 2 successful years, brought to the Soccer Bowl and created a... one thing we don't talk about enough is how the fans view their team, how the fans like to watch their team play, and the quality of football, quote unquote, if you want to use that trope. And say what you want, Dos Santos brought a successful team and a fun team to watch, and that aspect kind of changed. And it's kind of not even Daglish's fault, like you mentioned. Well, the roster was already in transition when Daglish was hired. There was already a exodus happening, and it was not necessarily Daglish's fault at all, and he had to deal with it. So yeah, you don't necessarily have the when you compare Dos Santos to Daglish, you don't have the same type of resources allotted to them. But for Dos Santos, he had as well a different type of knowledge base of networks, of contacts, of players that he knows that came into the team and gave a brand of football that the people of Ottawa were proud to watch. And you've seen growth in the community surrounding the Fury, the supporters group, the podcast that appeared. It was talk of the town at a certain point. But unfortunately, with I don't want to call it a fire sale, and I don't want to say it's they were waving the white flag and like, all right, we need to change business strategies going forward. But it's a little bit of what it was.
Well, no, for sure. I mean, they were cutting costs because they were losing money. But yeah, we named the Fury our team of the year that year in Canada, and that was the year of Defoe. So there was a lot of problems in Toronto, and I think even if you look, but the Whitecaps went pretty deep, if you recall. So it was a significant thing that we said that they had the most successful season of any team in Canada that year, and I believe that and hold on to that. And it quickly fell off, and it's been a difficult couple of years for the Fury. And I know that they're particularly frustrated with the USL in a lot of ways. And, I was watching, a lot of them were watching Cincinnati last night. Maybe we'll talk about that in our final segment, the US Open Cup game from last night. But
yeah,
it's almost like this taste because of a lot of things that happened to the club, and Doug Leash was part of it. But as you said, to go back to Julian, which is the positive story of this, he will get a longer leash because he is local. I mean, he's a Toronto-born guy, but he's local now in their mind because he played for them.
Yeah, in same province, same country. It's local. You're just 3 hours away.
Yeah.
Not even. It's local.
Yeah. And, look, and I think that's when you look at the hire, and especially if they're going to move into a Canadian Premier League, if that is the thinking within the upper management of that within Q, then having a guy like Julian in place as your face of the team makes a lot of sense, and they will give him a rope to grow into his position because of that, because he will have an ambassador kind of relationship that a lot of the players, if they move to the Canadian Premier League, or even if they go younger in USL next year, which isn't necessarily the worst idea in my mind, if they go younger and more prospect oriented, if you're going to, Ottawa Fury fans may disagree with that, but I mean, if you're not going to succeed at the very top, then at least you might want to be developing players, is my philosophy when it comes to it, and sort of a more local feel to it. So in that case, then he'll be the face, and having that as your face, and he'll be able to play that role and that leadership role and that sort of ambassador role really well because he's used to it. He's been doing it for years, and grow into the coaching role. And I don't think he's necessarily a poor coach in any way either. He's just an inexperienced coach. We don't really, the judge is out on whether he can coach a club team. So he's going to get a chance, and I hope he gets a long leash for it.
Speaking of coach and the carousel of coaching jobs, just a few hours after we wrapped the show yesterday as well in Major League Soccer, Colorado pulled the trigger and fired their club legend Pablo Mastroianni as head coach, replaced by Steve Cook as an interim basis. Colorado were terrible. Last year was just a blip. 38, 51, 35. His record this season was 6, 12, and 4. But Pablo, no more.
Yeah, and look, you're looking at Colorado. They are right now third last overall in the league. Only terrible DC United and Minnesota behind them, and they are tied on points with Minnesota. So this was it was an outlier last year, and we said at the time they had a tremendous defensive sort of approach, but they just could not score, and there was nothing that he did at any point during the 3 years that he was there that sort of addressed that primary fault. And we've said it many, many times. I've said it many, many times anyway, that the old adage about defense winning championships is a load of bunk within Major League Soccer. You need to find an ability to consistently put points on the board, put goals in the net. And he never could with the resources that he was provided there and with the sort of the style that he put forth. Whether they can change this around, I don't know. Colorado's got a lot of concerns and a lot of sort of problems on a lot of different levels. And I don't think the management there, the ownership there is particularly spectacular either. I mean, they're making, I can't help but imagine that the Tim Howard signing was probably, outside of his pay range. So
I'm not going to put all the blame on him. And I think he's the type of guy that will get another shot in Major League Soccer just because he has a legacy in terms of playing there as well.
But what I'm wondering, though, Duane, is what does that say about Colorado? Because if you remember how Pablo Mastroeni got hired and how Oscar Pereira just got up and left.
Flipped away.
Yeah, he's like,
Yeah.
you know what? I'm going to go to Dallas because what they offer me is more in my line of thinking and more of how I want to develop the academy side and how I want to spend a little bit more money than Colorado does because, well, you can't really spend less because it's one of the teams that spends the least in the entire league. And I want to be in a club that I feel has some growth potential. So I'm going to leave here, even though I had a good season. I'm going to leave Colorado and go to Dallas and be one of the most successful club since that move. With hindsight, we understand why. It's not just about maybe winning that season and had a winning season and you're wondering why is the coaching leave if he has a good situation. Well, he could see the writing on the wall that, yeah, you might have a good season here and there, but to get long-term success, long-term place in the top 3 of the league and consistent place in the playoff and battling for trophies, well, you need to spend more money. And Mastroeni had to do what he could with what he had and never had, like, we talked about just DPs. Colorado barely has DPs. I remember, what was his name? After the World Cup in 2014, we had that young player that went to play for Colorado, and that was a bust. I forgot his name now, but that was a bust. And you have Gashi now, has great goals, but too few and far between and not enough. And Colorado, well, they're going to continue to be in 2004, and the rest of the league will continue to move forward.
Yeah, at 1.0, that would be what you'd say with that, right? Like they are the epitome of
1.5. I'll give him like a 0.5 for some DPs at some point, but even the one, like, honestly, now when you look at the state of the league and look at the stadiums that are going to come to appear now in the league, yeah, it's maybe 1.0 because look at the difference of Nashville if they have a stadium or Atlanta. And yeah, I know it's hard to compare Minnesota, Atlanta, which are backed by NFL teams. That's why it's hard to compare the stadium designs. But look at other stadiums and look at Colorado now. Like back then, it was something big to have a soccer-specific stadium. Now, Dick's Sporting Goods ain't that good anymore.
Well, Dick's Sporting Goods was good. That facility, and I say facility purposely there, was built with profiteering from the fields that surround it in mind. And anyone who's ever talked from Colorado will agree with that, is that they have a lot of youth soccer tournaments, a lot of youth soccer events, and that's great for the community. Like, let's not dismiss that completely. But in terms of a Major League Soccer team, it's not particularly conducive to success. It sort of suggests that the motives are, or that they're just part of an overall sort of strategy that isn't necessarily designed with winning in Major League Soccer level. The one thing I will say this, if I can go a little outside the box on this, and I think we both agree that there's something wrong in Colorado, and that's, they won the 2010 MLS Cup kind of on a bit of a luck run, and that's the one thing they have to hold on to, but there's not a lot of success otherwise. So we agree with that. But if you look at sort of, what's the underlying philosophy behind the folks that advocate for fundamental changes in the structure of Major League Soccer that say is that there's quote unquote no pressure and that there's no suggestion that teams will make moves to try and better their position. Well, that's the one thing I'll maybe defend Colorado a little bit on here. They fired a coach mid-season when there was really, and a coach that had a cachet with the fans there because of his past success as a player that had success this last year, but they still fired him this year. So that suggests to me that maybe there is pressure there that they're not getting full credit for.
And dare I say, the best dressed coach of the league too.
Yeah, we missed the mustache. We'll always miss the curly mustache.
The mustache, the 3-piece, the assorted vests and accessories. Come on, gotta love me some Pablo Mastroeni fashion sense. Maybe we should have a segment on weekly on the show and just call Pablo and have a little fashion discussion.
Well, I don't know if I'm the one to ask because I sit here wearing the green Australia soccer shorts and a 2 sizes too big for me Manchester City top is what I'm currently dressed in. But so I don't know if I'm quite the right person to host that. But nonetheless, we could do that. We could have a fashion conversation if that's what people want.
Yeah, people are really screaming for it. They're like, yes, we want it. But no, but again, Duane, the coaching carousel, and it will continue.
Yeah, and look, the idea that there isn't pressure in Major League Soccer is patently ridiculous. But nonetheless, the crowd that shall not say their name believes otherwise. So there's nothing. I had to mute 3 of them this morning from Detroit because they believe that the McFranchising of soccer in America was the worst thing happening right now, which means they're not reading the news.
No, yeah, pretty much. Well, I kind of stopped reading the news because, well, I can't handle it, but that's something totally on me.
There you go. All right. Yes.
Speaking of
soccer, it's easier.
exactly. Speaking of totally on me, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll wrap the show up, talk a little bit about bits and bytes and Champions League and a preview tonight's games. You're listening to Soccer Today on SPN Radio. You can find the on-demand version of this very show on iTunes, Stitcher, Feedburner, Podbay Player, Podbean, anywhere you get your podcasts under the Sports Podcasting Network feed. Subscribe to our YouTube page to make sure you never miss a live show talking about soccer today, the MLS postgame show, open lines after dark, 5 rings daily during the Olympics. Make sure you subscribe and give us a follow on Twitter at SportsPodNet and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network. And we're back on Soccer Today. Duane, I was saying before the break that this break's on me because I need coffee. I finished last night Narcos, and I have to say, yes, I might be 2 years late. It might take me a while. I have a lot of podcasts and a lot of sports to watch before I can actually binge watch some TV shows. But finished the first season of Narcos last night, so I definitely need my coffee.
Yeah, well, yeah, at least you're not needing what Narcos is peddling, so that's a different thing. That's a good thing. Don't do that, Kev.
No, you don't wanna hear Kevin on the radio with doing that type of stuff because that will be like unlistenable.
All right.
So let's talk about soccer. Soccer. You know soccer, the game you play when you kick the ball around. The soccer. Let's talk soccer.
Soccer. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Enough of
that. Tonight there's a few games in Major League Soccer, especially Montreal, Chicago. Interesting game. Can Montreal put 3 in a row? It will be interesting. Yesterday, Duane, as well, there was some games in the Champions League, and we've talked about Liverpool, Hoffenheim. Liverpool 2, Hoffenheim 1.
They don't like to do things easily at Anfield. Well, they weren't at Anfield, but you know what I mean. The 2-0 lead, they looked pretty good for it. Hoffenheim had a good start to the game, and then sort of it fell into sort of by chalk a little bit more. They are a club that sort of, I think, exceeded expectations last year. Hoffenheim, I'm talking about. Liverpool, of course.
Liverpool too.
Colors come out at the end of it. Yeah, well, maybe, else. Yeah. I mean, yeah, if you look at the fall of Arsenal last year, Liverpool kind of replaced them in that Champions League 4 spot. They did. They got the 4th place trophy last year. So there you go. The defense, it's not hard to critique Liverpool or to handicap what the problem is. They can't defend to save their damn life, and they gave up the penalty. They were lucky that I forget the name of the player who took it, to be honest, right now off the top of my head, but they're lucky that he decided to basically chip it to the keeper. Otherwise, we're talking about 2-2 in a very different game heading back to Anfield. They gave up they had the brain fart at the end of the game, and until Liverpool can sort of correct that aspect of their game, they are 4th at best and probably closer to a Europa League quality team than they are a Champions League quality team. I think about the group stage and who they draw, and if you look at some of the Liverpool is going to be in the 3rd pot. So they are going to have 2. If you look at Pot B of the Champions League, it is going to be insane. You're talking about PSG, City, United.
PSG should have like a buy. Like, all right, you bought Neymar, we changed your pot. You go back to A pot now.
Yeah, no, it's nuts. And so you're going to be requiring a little bit of luck because the A pot's got some lighter touches in it because it's the champions of the 8 top coefficient teams. So you've got the clubs in there that aren't necessarily really in that Pot B conversation. But then you're going to get a world-class team in Pot B, and then, whatever you're going to get out of Pot C or Pot D, it's going to be whatever. But the point I'm making is that Liverpool is going to have 2 very tough teams, very likely in its group. We're talking about Atleti and PSG perhaps, or something like that.
Yeah,
so
like a Dortmund or something.
Dortmund's a possibility as well too. The possibility of them getting out and getting through a knockout round, to me, unless they fix the backline issue, is slim. They will be punished amongst those top teams when you're playing that kind of thing or that kind of way. I speak from experience because a lot of what Liverpool does wrong is the same thing City did wrong in Europe the last couple of years. They switch off defensively and get killed. And I could see that happening to them. And we saw it happen against Hoffenheim in that late goal. I think they'll get through this. The 2 away goals is probably going to be enough, but you got to be worried moving forward.
Yeah, well, quickly on Liverpool, right? We talk a lot about death and how the big clubs, the money clubs, Manchester City, Chelsea, Madrid, Barcelona, that type of level club of the Champions League, with the amount of money they have, they can have like the death that Liverpool, unfortunately, can't afford. And they have to focus and really have to focus now just to try to hold on to him. But to get a player like the Coutinho of this world and to have attacking options like this, they kind of need to sacrifice somewhere else. And, well, for the last few years, it's been at the defensive line. It's been the back line. That's where they've chosen to apply that sacrifice.
Well, and so does the Premier League in a nutshell, too. I mean, that's why when a lot of people, not to make everything about City, and friends of mine will say that I do make everything about City, and perhaps some of the listeners will too, but they were criticized a lot for spending what they did at the back. But I think that was, they had to, because they were terrible at the back last year. And they still, I'm not convinced. I mean, hell, they couldn't, well, they only allowed 1 goal, but they still allowed a goal against Girona yesterday. At any rate, look, yeah, that's the problem in the Premier League. And I think it has to do with sort of a lot with what the Premier League has become. It's become not the world's great, the world's best league, quote unquote. It's become the world's most entertaining league. And part of that is because they put an emphasis on attacking power. And that's great for fans to watch. But in terms of,
I'm sorry, Duane, I was just going to say it's because of the production values and the availability of this league that it's the most entertaining league. I would go a little further and in a different spectrum, saying it's the most watched league. Say whatever that means for you. That's what this league is because of the way this league is portrayed and the production values and the type of players that it brings in and the values of the club and stuff. So it's the most watched league. But no, I totally agree with you. And sometimes it's decisions that club has to make, and it makes for entertaining soccer, though.
Yeah, it does. And I'm not complaining as a fan. I love it, and it's why, from my pure fandom perspective, I prioritize winning the league over everything else, because I think that is the ultimate prize for a fan of a Premier League team. Forget the Champions League. You can win that, bonus. And yeah, you're going to have a good party that day, but really compare apples to apples and win the league. And that's what it should be about. And then I think that Liverpool, even if you get deep within their psyche, these teams want to make the Champions League because there's massive money in it, which helps them on the league side. But I think, if you talk to enough Liverpool fans, winning a Premier League title would be something they've won. They've seen this team win the Champions League a decade and 12 years ago now, but it's been 12 years ago since that, man. Crazy. Anyway.
Anyways, there's other games interesting today, by the way. Yesterday, there was an interesting own goal, by the way. The game of BSC Young Boys versus CSKA Moscow in the qualifying round of the Champions League once again. And it was
Red Army.
Yeah, the Red Army, basically, if you're a follower of the sport a long time ago. But Young Boys scored in their own net in a glorious own goal where a defender just heads it back to his keeper without realizing that his keeper is not there. The ball falls, the keeper turns around, lunges, dives, tries to grasp the ball with his fingers, keeps it out of, it just crossed the line. And it's 1-0 for Red Army.
Those that have known me long enough and know me like when I was just like a name on the boards, know that my name on the discussion boards, the old bulletin boards, was Sweet Own Goal. And it was because when I was playing the game back when I was 19, a friend of mine, we were at, he was watching us play. It was a derby. It was two friends of our friend group. He was the goalie on the other team, and I was playing forward for my team. And during the game, our buddies were there, and I was defending, which is something I never should do. A corner kick. I went up, screamed keeper, and headed the ball perfectly into the top right corner of my own goal. And when we were leaving later that night, after silence for a few minutes, my friend looked at me, shook his head, started to laugh, and went, "Man, that was one sweet own goal." And that is why it became my nickname on the boards for years. So I would say that, Kevin, was a sweet own goal yesterday.
It was. But you know what wasn't sweet? And what must have felt so bitter is if you were in Nippert Stadium last night for the U.S. Open Cup semifinal between FC Cincinnati and the New York Red Bulls. It was 2-0 Cincinnati at the 75th minute. But,
look, Cincinnati get a lot of credit for playing as good as they could for as long as I think that they were capable of playing. But the bubble just burst in that 75th minute. As soon as that first goal went in, I'm not going to say they panicked, but I think that the legs got a little heavier. And the last 15 minutes and plus the stoppage or the extra time was complete one-way traffic. In fact, when I talk about stoppage time, it should have been over already when BWP hit the crossbar, hit the bottom of the crossbar. It was almost as close as Josie in the MLS Cup final, only they didn't get the hand to it. It just hit the crossbar in this case. It was one-way traffic for the last 45 minutes of the game when you include the extra time. And as I tweeted at the end of the game, it makes the final less compelling to a neutral, because I was watching that game yesterday. There were a lot of people in my feed from Canada, from other that weren't necessarily people that would watch the U.S. Open Cup normally, that had tuned in. It was a great stream, by the way. So credit to the U.S. Open Cup folks, the USSF folks, for getting what I thought was a really high quality stream, and something that events like that should be doing more often. I know a lot of people in the U.S.
where the camera feed was actually moving and following the play and zooms, and it wasn't just like a fixed camera, just a hard camera.
Yeah.
It was like more intricate. It
was like watching TV. And I know a lot of people in the States didn't like that it wasn't on ESPN proper, and I get that, and that's something you should aspire to. But no, I thought it was a high-quality broadcast, and they should be credited for making that happen, because I remember watching U.S. Open Cup games, even at this stage, like not even that long ago, 3-4 years ago, when it was that fixed thing, and et cetera. It was, even watching the final was difficult up here sometimes. So,
I remember wanting to watch the U.S. Open Cup and not being able to. That's how much.
Precisely.
Yeah, exactly.
So, it was a good story. And look, it doesn't mean that USL is on par with MLS. That would be a silly argument. It means that in knockout competitions, you can have Cinderella runs and everyone enjoys them. And I think that Cincinnati added something to this. And it was a good little run for them. And the bubble burst in the end. I thought it was unfortunate that the fans were booing at the end of it. They were booing New York because they thought they were time wasting, which is what their club would have been doing too in the same situation. But then they immediately went into a clapping and made it about their team. And I think that was good. What this means for expansion is an interesting conversation. I have had some people that have, since I put it out last night, that there's no way MLS can ignore this now, right? I did have some people push back against that. I don't know whether they were just being bitter or not, but there's some suggestion that Cincinnati, fills the stadium up with cheap tickets and cheap beer. And to that, I say, good. That's something they should be doing, because they are playing at a level where you need to entice people to the stadium. And once you get them there and they're having fun, then they probably will pay a little bit more to continue to have the fun if they move to a higher level. So good for them. I think, as I said, and I do believe that just like Sacramento in many ways, even though this is not a market MLS would have picked out of a hat, or picked out of a hat, maybe would have picked blindly, not blindly. I would have chose. I can't talk right now, Kevin. You know what I'm trying to say.
You're saying that if they had a map and they threw a dart and they did on Sacramento, they'd be like, damn it.
Yes, but now that it's here and now that they're seeing what's happening, it's hard to ignore. And I think that this could end up benefiting them down the long, because I don't think that they're in Portland either. If they had their choice, if they were just looking at spreadsheets to pick their expansion sides.
Columbus,
You know why? Did people know why Columbus got the team? Like, I don't know, Kevin.
I think once a year. I think once a year we remind the people the story, but I think it's that time of year. Go ahead.
Yeah, what happened is when Major League Soccer was first announced back in '94. They launched in '96, and they announced it in the lead up to the World Cup. They said that whoever could get the most deposits, whatever city could get the most deposits for an expansion team, like that they could just put it out and say, look, put $50 down to commit to buying season tickets. Whoever has the most, we'll give them a team, regardless of where they are. And Columbus stood up. And the market, for whatever you think of it now, at the time, they had the most deposits. They were the most earliest adapters. So of the 96 teams, I think a lot of people would be surprised by that. And that's why Columbus ended up getting that spot ahead of, a more fancied market in like Chicago. Chicago didn't come into 98. So it is why they're a 96 club. And that's whenever I hear people talk about, we got to get rid of Columbus. We got to get rid of Columbus, even though there's been a rivalry at times between Columbus and Toronto in the past, and even a personal rivalry between myself and some Columbus fans way back when, Bill Archer. I still always will defend the Crew in the sense because they have that history. And yeah, the numbers have dropped, but I think that their core audience there has remained pretty loyal and pretty consistent. And we shouldn't be wishing ill will upon anyone who's remained loyal and consistent for as long as they have. At any rate, that's the story of how the Crew got their team, Kevin.
And tonight, you just mentioned Chicago. Well, I'll see them play tonight. That's Saputo, the only game in Major League Soccer tonight. Montreal versus Chicago. Always interesting to have Chicago in town now. We have Schweinsteiger, one of the best coach in the league this season, Valko Paunovic, Nikolic as well, who hasn't scored in 6 games, I think now. So former Golden Boot leader. Now it's back to being Vila. That's kind of dangerous, though, when you have a goal scorer, prolific one that's in a slump and comes plays against you. You're like, I don't know. Kind of want that slump to continue, but usually it means that it's due. We'll see how it goes tonight. But Montreal, Chicago, Montreal going for a third straight win.
Yeah, and there's a rare moment throughout Toronto, throughout TFC pubs tonight. You will hear that chant, Tic-Tac Tabernacle, let's go, you Impact.
Wow, that just feels weird.
Well, that's how to Impact goes with that. They will be ultimately helping TFC with a win tonight. But I guess their playoff hopes supersede any desire to see TFC not win the Shield. I'm sure for most Impact fans.
And if you're an Impact fan, the team you have to look for now is Atlanta. Atlanta's in 6th position in the Eastern Conference, and Montreal is 7th. Montreal will have more games played after this week than Atlanta. But Montreal has a chance at least to get some points on Atlanta because Atlanta is not playing until August 23rd, which means Montreal plays 2 games up until this point, tonight and Saturday. Chicago, RSL. 2 teams that Montreal could get points from if they played the way they played last weekend. So Montreal looking confident against Chicago tonight and against Salt Lake on Saturday, has a chance to bridge that 5-point gap. It could be by the end of the week, Montreal in 5th or 6th position in Eastern Conference, but tonight a win is necessary.
Yeah, looking. What did we say? We said this. They've done 2 in a row. Before leading into that, we said that we needed to see the Impact win 3 in a row before we would start to talk about them in legitimate terms as being a playoff contending team. And they've won 2 in a row. So they win tonight, and I think we can start to have that conversation again. But it is a vital win tonight, and not just to help their old rivals win the Shield too.
Samuel Piet's debut at home for the Montreal Impact. Look for the stands to be full, to be raucous, and to be really intrigued by Samuel Piet. I just remember when there was 300 in the Piet section during the Canada Curacao game. Can't wait to see what's happening with 20,000 of them.
I hope that they're not expecting the poor guy to buy 300 tickets per game. I mean, I know he's got a decent salary, but
that's why they got him. We're like, okay, Sam, we're stuck at 20,500. Our sellout is 2801. So how about we get you so you buy 300 tickets every game?
We're going to pay 180,000, but you got to give us 50,000 back immediately for tickets.
No, but I know we mentioned it on the show already, and it's Wednesday, and it's a repeating story. But Samuel Piet, amazing debut, team of the week after 1 game, and it's not just us. It's not just chauvinistic Canadians talking about Samuel Piet in a very highly fashion. It's everybody in the game, and I'm excited to see him play another 90 minutes tonight because, well, a lot of injuries in the midfield, a lot of. Unfortunately, with the departure of Callum Malice and some injuries, it's bad timing, but they had to pull the trigger with that trade as well to give Malice a chance to start somewhere else. One of the last originals of Major League Soccer for the Impact. But tonight, I'm really excited because Piet is there. Piet is playing well. Zamali seems to have found his groove once again. If those 2 DPs and the sweeper kind of Piet can have the same type of performances at Saturday, they can win any given game. And tonight, it's one of those.
All right, quickly,
wanted to briefly mention, if you haven't had a chance to read Kurt Larson's article and Stephen Beta-Short today in the Toronto Sun, you should take a quick look at that. The details around the injury that took place. It was much more seriously, at least by Kurt's retelling of it, much more serious than people thought.
Speaking of Callum
it could have been life-threatening.
Speaking of Callum Malice,
well, doctors apparently said that it could have been life-threatening had they not got him in earlier, because basically the spleen had ruptured. The spleen was the spleen anyway. Whatever had ruptured.
Yeah, it was the spleen. Yeah, it's a spleen. And it's, I said Malice. No, it was Fisher on that one. Malice was last year, but it was Fisher.
Yeah, exactly. It's hard to keep it straight. Yeah. Anyway, the toxins were like leaking into his system. So, I mean, I don't care what your partisanship is. You didn't want that. And since the Fisher since apologized to him too. It was a bit of a freak. And I mean, it's a play for sure. But
it's
the intensity's up. He didn't mean to hurt him that bad.
No, exactly. And there's one thing for the defender to go at that duel at that speed and that velocity. The other player stayed there too and fought for his ground, right? So it's kind of like it's a position battle, and it was positioned to get the better opportunity for that ball, and both players did not want to give in, and sometimes it would happen, resulting in big collision, and in big collision, you never intend to like destroy somebody's spleen, and that was just a consequence.
Yeah. At any rate, read the article. It details, sort of the medical side of it. It also talks about how Beta-Short found inspiration with his roommate in the hospital, which was a young woman that was fighting cancer, and sort of that put things in perspective for him, and et cetera, and how he's going to treat her to a game, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a nice story. It's a good human interest story that should interest you, even if you're not a CFC fan. Take a read in that. It's linked out on my feed today.
Speaking of Kurt Larson, you were the guest of his first ever podcast, Kurt Larson Podcast, probably available everywhere now. Last week, but yeah, you were his first guest. I can't wait to listen to it.
Yeah. Well, last week, still it's up there now. I was on SoundCloud. That's how I listened to it originally. I always listen back to myself when I'm on someone else's podcast to make sure I didn't say anything too dumb. No, he going with a very conversational sort of approach, which is similar to what we do, just without the interviews. So, and it's TFC focused for sure, although we did actually do a big segment on the Canadian Premier League in that as well. So if you're a CanPL fan that's maybe not a TFC fan, so you've avoided the podcast thinking it would not be for you, flash forward to the end of it. The last 15 minutes or so is Canadian Premier League focused.
All right, and you can follow Duane on Twitter, as always, at 24th Minute, and myself at Kev Laramee. We'll be back tomorrow with talk about tonight's game. We'll talk about the weekend and the Champions League and whatever happens today. What did I say yesterday, Duane? There's always something happening on Tuesdays. Yesterday we had 2 coach fires. So Wednesdays, usually it's hit or miss. So we'll see if it's a hit or a miss in the world of football.
All right. For sure, we will have a game to talk about. We'll have games to talk about at the very least, and maybe even an interview if we can get it set up. All right, Kevin, on that note, as always, I'm going to let you say goodbye.
You can follow us at Soccer Today SPN as well to never miss a live show. Facebook.com/sports podcasting network. And as always, until tomorrow, I'm Kevin Laramee, and for Duane Rollins, have a good soccer. You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.